Hello everyone, this is ETV Special Edition and I'm Santayo Tamarat with this edition. With this edition, I'll try to focus on the global actors on Ethiopian conflict. And thank you so much for watching us. And my guest today is Dr.Anteneh Getachew from Institute of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia. Thank you so much for staying with me again and a very warm welcome to you, Dr.Anteneh Getachew.
Thank you for having me.
Well, our today's topic would be just the global actors in the Ethiopian conflict, and the TPLF, as you know, has been trying to regionalize and internationalize the conflict in northern Ethiopia after it tried to attack the northern command of the National Defense Force in November 2020. So why do you think it's so?
Actually, since the first day of the offensive directed at the northern command of Ethiopian Defense Force, the TPLF has tried to make provocative activities to internationalize, particularly to regionalize the conflict. Mm-hmm. In his attack, or the missile attack towards Asmara, that was one signal that TPLF has tried its best to make the conflict regional. It has different importance, different political gains for TPLF. One, in making internationalizing the conflict or regionalizing the conflict, the global attention will be directed towards this conflict. Mm-hmm. International actors or global actors, including superpowers, may give a close watch towards this conflict and may intervene ultimately to save TPLF leaders. Probably through that they expect to get some kind of passage or a gateway to flee out of the country, maybe probably to escape from the judgment of justice. Mm-hmm. The other one, as you know, the region is very much vital in terms of its geopolitical strategy, geostrategic position. Mm-hmm. So different national, international and regional actors may closely watch the region because of its geopolitical benefit or importance. It's one of the 4 important corridors in the world where more than 50% of oil trade is done through this corridor along the Red Sea, the Gulf and the Bab el-Mandeb. So this region will not be disregarded by any actor internationally, whether it is have a regional interest or international interest. This conflict will just catch the attention of everyone. Oh. TPLF knows this well. So TPLF is doing such kind of provocative actions since the earlier days of its offensive attack on Indef to gain such kind of political benefits. Okay.
Well, so there are just arguments that the TPLF has multiple foreign supporters for its aggression against the federal government. And even some believe that the very first plot of attacking the National Defense Force Northern Command was carried out with the external actors. And what is your take on that?
Yeah, let me raise 2 points here. On one aspect, it is obvious that because of 2 things, there will be multiple. It is undeniable. It is inevitable to have multiple actors in this conflict. One, the protracted nature of the conflict. It has been more than almost 2 years since we are in conflict in the north. So the protracted nature of the conflict by itself attracts the attention of multiple actors, whether they are regional or international or national interests. They will intervene in this conflict either way. In one way, their interest might vary. The other is, as I told you before, the geostrategic location of Ethiopia in the Horn of Africa is vital. So there is superpowers, great powers rivalry, competition to control the region and to just ensure their national interest. They want to ensure their strategic interest in the region. So they don't want to let the region to be totally devastated and destabilized in any way. This is one thing. So having these 2 points into assumption, we can think about multiple actors, whether they are inside of TPLF, whether they are in favor of Ethiopian federal government. That is a different agenda. Sometimes we have to be careful to make some kind of act of relational mapping. We have to be cautious enough, especially for Ethiopian government, since we are on the process of making diplomatic re-engagement, especially with the West camp, including the US and the European Union and European countries particularly. We have already started some kind of endeavors to just make diplomatic engagement that we have Ethiopia lost during this war and during the struggle with the great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. So you have to be careful, cautiously watching. It might sometimes require very rigorous research. This actor have direct relationship with the other one, and they're generally to put the actors' relational mapping, we have to be cautious on it. But undeniably, there are plenty of actors we can mention by name. We can start, say, for example, from the national level.
Okay.
At national level, we do have armed non-state actors, non-armed or civil non-state actors. From the armed non-state actors, probably the different rebel groups, just moving in different parts of Ethiopia, we are having different questions. Say, for example, the Sheni or LF Sheni group is one thing, the Al-Shabaab terrorist group is the other thing, where TPLF might use, or other external regional powers might use as their proxy forces, just like Egypt might use these forces. There are plenty of just factions, different tribal factions in Ethiopia that reside mostly in Mekelle and just receiving different instruments or assistance from TPLF. TPLF is a mastermind of such groups. So these groups have different interests. These are international actors. At regional level, say for example, we can see obviously TPLF is receiving military assistance and weapon assistance from Egypt and Sudan. There are more than clear evidence on the ground that the government has proved it to be true. Just TPLF is getting such assistance. The other one is Eritrea. Eritrea is also an actor in this conflict. Eritrea have its own security dilemma because TPLF has always trying to just provoke Eritrea to invite into this conflict. At the same time, TPLF wants us to try to international and regionalize to get the attention of the global community through humanitarian crisis, human suffering. They are speaking out loud, crying out loud every time. They are just becomes a target of plenty of actors. This is the nature of TPLF. But in one way or the other, there are multiple actors. At international level, obviously there are different actors. Whether their stand can be seen in different way in relationship to the warring parties.
Okay, before just going to the international actors, can we talk about the interest of the regional actors, particularly Egypt, the TPLF itself?
Yeah, obviously, Creed. The interest of Egypt, say, for example, is one major player in this conflict, Egypt. And it is starkly that the interest of Egypt is to destabilize Ethiopia, because Egypt has a deep and long-lasting interest because of the Nile waters. Yeah, the Nile waters. And then after the starting of the GERD, Egypt have been obviously cautiously watching the development of the GERD. When the central government has a very quick and determined decision to pursue or to continue and complete the GERD, Egypt wants us to use such kind of proxy force like TPLF to destabilize the region, to destabilize the country, so that the government will divert its focus from building development and like the GERD towards maybe investing much into the war. This is one tactic. The other probably, it might not be considered as a major actor. Sudan is there. Sudan can be used by Egypt. Egypt is also using, especially when we talk about Sudan, you have to be careful about it. The public in Sudan have positive attitude towards Ethiopia. Sure. They value the relationship, the long-lasting relationship between these two people, the brotherly people, historical attachment, cultural, linguistic attachment we had. But the TPLF, the Egypt government wants to use as a proxy for especially the incumbent military government that is already established in Sudan. Yeah. So there are different attempts around the border between Ethiopia and Sudan that, there are some kind of conflicts over there. TPLF forces use this corridor to just make their movements in and out. And Sudan, under the proxy, under the pretext of just making refuge, there are TPLF refugees that are fleeing to Sudan, just taking military training. This shows that clearly they are into the conflict, these two powers. The other is Eritrea. Eritrea, because of the peace diplomacy after the coming of the Ethiopian incumbent, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed had come to power, he has already established a rapprochement with Eritrea, and the two countries becomes in good terms. So this makes TPLF to be alert, because they know they had really an unclosed agenda, a long time, huge profile when they were during the battle, the fight with the previous Ethiopian regime, the Derg regime. So TPLF calculates this one. When Ethiopia, the incumbent, becomes in good terms with Eritrea, especially Isaias, TPLF have some kind of frustration because they know what they did to them. Now, the interest of Eritrea might not be related with maybe serving the interest of Ethiopia. We cannot think of in that way. Every country, every actor have its own interest to serve. That interest might just fortunately or unfortunately might just might happen to be similar with one of the warring parties. Unfortunately, the interest of Eritrea and Ethiopian incumbent might become similar because they have common enemies. This enemy, the TPLF, is very much dangerous, not only to Ethiopia, rather to the whole region of the Horn of Africa. They are still trying to destabilize, to invite more actors. So here, for me, the interest of Eritrea is a matter of security dilemma, because TPLF has made plenty of attempts to provoke Eritrean forces to intervene into this conflict. So they have their own security dilemma. When TPLF gets power, when it builds momentum in terms of force, he might make an offensive attack on Eritrea. It has been shown practically when it makes a missile attack to Asmara. Yeah. So different actors may have an interest. Some of these interests might be clear.
Maybe the Eritrean government was silent, but there are reports recently the TPLF tried to break the eastern corridor, southeast corridor of the Eritrean borders that links maybe TPLF, if it succeeded, to the ports, so that it can just get some ports to smuggle armies. There are just such reports. And now let's go to the, but one thing that you haven't mentioned is the TPLF itself. The TPLF has been just over 50 years in its history since the struggle to power in always allied manner with Eritrean forces. And then what is its interest? Is that really Ethiopian interest, a kind of Ethiopian interest to build a democratic, well-developed Ethiopian, or is it just trying to build the greater Tigray, as many argue, and also being as a servant to the Western government's interest?
Okay. When you refer back the most substantiated literature about the guerrilla history of TPLF, they have different plans. Since the early days of this armed struggle and the guerrilla fighting, they have different ambitions. One thing, in the 1977 Ethiopian calendar, I think, in the local calendar, they have established Malelit Tigray. When they feel that Ethiopia is a broad country, it is a resourceful country, it is good for the market, TPLF changes its mind and wants to govern Ethiopia for the last 27 years. it has controlled the political economy. It has been in power. It has been in the structure. It has controlled everything. One. But whenever this power, in some way, in any way, when it is dismantled or just removed from power, they went to just play their plan B. That means they aspire to be a republic. They have already indoctrinated, they have been through the propaganda, there have been different strategies and techniques to just change the mind setup of the people of Tigray for long. Really, they are recreating a new society in Tigray. They make the people to be in terms with its neighbors, its brothers and sisters, with Amhara, with Afar, with Eritrea. They feel that the people to be in a siege mentality. So TPLF appear to be a savior of the Tigray people. Really, as a person who have been spent many of my young age in Tigray, really I feel some kind of melancholic. I have a melancholy for Tigray people. But we have to understand that what TPLF has done for long, what is this ambition? Sometimes they want to just make greater Tigray. That means when they talk about also greater Tigray, they forget the lowland Islamic religion followers. They simply talk about the Highlander Christian. That thing by itself has some kind of political problem with Eritrea. But the Eritrean force, especially those led by Isaias, knows the nature of TPLF very well since their early days of their arms struggle. So this doesn't work. But they have different calculations. In some way, unless they lose, if they lose power, if they are not able to control or sustain, to put over a minority rule with its full scale of controlling the political and economy, they just want to play their plan B, and they have also plan C. But if that fails, ultimately, they want to completely destabilize the region. They want to fragment Ethiopia. Ultimately, they want to develop or form a strong Tigray Republic. That is the ambition of TPLF.
Well, now we can just move on to the actors, the global actors of the Ethiopian conflict. And let's start from individuals in the international arena, diplomats and some chiefs of or heads of some organization of the United Nations and the like organizations. Let's start from these, and who are just these actors and how are they have been in the conflict?
Okay. Whenever we think of conflict actors, we need to just make a very broad horizon. One, there are state actors that clearly can be understood. Their interests can be just easily just understood from the kind of game they are playing. But there are also non-state actors. There are businessmen, corporations, envoys, retired diplomats that may have good relationship with former TPLF leaders. Mostly they are in the White House recently in the Democratic Party. TPLF has good friends or partners in that way. This doesn't mean that the State Department or the American government is in good terms with TPLF or cannot judge that America wants us to just destabilize Ethiopia or wants us to bring TPLF back to power. I don't believe it that way. I'm not, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not just in that school of thought. The West, the superpowers, have great geopolitical interest in the region. This is undeniable because Ethiopia's geostrategic position is very much vital and important, and Ethiopia has been an anchor state for long. Whether we believe it or not, this is a practical reality that we know, that we are living for ages. But we need to be also careful to just to configure this government want us to destabilize Ethiopia. They don't want Ethiopia to exist. This is, I think, it is unwise in terms of diplomacy, and it doesn't have just that much evidence to talk. But there are people who are just making some kind of game through lobbying or just through selling the idea of TPLF at international arena. And TPLF is investing much in that regard in terms of playing aggressive diplomacy. That is why we are losing to just a kind of terrorist illusion. As a country, Ethiopia is a big nation.
Sure.
We lost to it in terms of diplomacy. It is sometimes because of it is our failure. But I don't believe that at the beginning of the transition, the political transition in Ethiopia, when Dr. Abiy Ahmed came to power, TPLF have sides with Ethiopia. They showed us their support. Even they bring the Prime Minister Abiy to extent of receiving a Nobel Peace Prize award. So this shows that really they were in good terms. But later on, because of this lack of power consolidation, because of multiple problems that the country has been through for the last 27 years, the incumbent is unable to consolidate its power soon. And TPLF just wants to portray itself to be a powerful agent still, so that these people it is normal to just to be in dilemma, because TPLF during the war really advancing to maybe to almost around Addis Ababa, very closer. Yeah, this is just a very close experience that we remember. Mm-hmm. So these superpowers want a stable Horn Africa region. They don't want to lose, or they don't want the region to be destabilized. The superpowers, in a sense, there is a US there. There are Saudi Arabians can be, Turkeys are there, Russia, China, especially if you consider the Red Sea region, they are really just establishing a military base in Djibouti, in Port Sudan.
Even strong military bases.
Yes, strong. There is great power rivalry and competition in the Horn of Africa. We have to bear in mind this. We are not in a region that is not important to the world. We are in a very vital region that is important to the region, a geostrategic location. That is why Ethiopian diplomacy becomes very much difficult unless we are tactically endowed with it. We are strategic thinkers. Unless we don't have good diplomats, unless we struggle to our best to serve our national interests, the diplomatic level battle at the global arena is very much tough and difficult, as we can see.
Sure.
But I don't believe that the West is directed to destabilize or to just dismantle completely Ethiopia. I don't buy that kind of idea.
Whether you don't buy or not, I have just to see it in a different way. There are just points where, for example, the US government was just trying to make press releases regarding the security situation in Ethiopia, particularly when the Ethiopian government called as a 1 million diaspora, the Diaspora Homecoming Challenge. The event I really don't forget is that on the 20th of December, in Ethiopian calendar, the US government released the last security alert for its citizens. Addis Ababa is under siege, so we are going to offer, if you don't have money to afford, we are going to give you credits, so you must leave immediately kind of things. But tens of thousands of diaspora community, Ethiopian friends, Africans are just flocking to Addis Ababa, and the Ethiopian government was just making a national hosting ceremony. So seeing this and just making such kind of a threatening statement is, what does it signify? What does it portray to the other global communities while the country is in such situation? And maybe it does not mean that this may spoil ultimately the relationship between the long-lasting, historic, over 100 years relationship between the two countries. However, there are just interests in such cases. If Ethiopia stood against the interests of America, if the American government believes so, because of those actors, individuals, senators in the Democratic the government, Joe Biden's administration, there are just people that are just acting as political activists, lobbyists for the TPLF, and just trying to convince the American government in such regard. And this is how governments make policy changes against Ethiopia, I guess. So the American government may assume this, at least toppling down Abiy Ahmed's government if Abiy Ahmed's government is understood this way by the Americans, I guess. So there are just some actors at state level, And the other most important thing that we must mention is people like WHO chief, Dr. Tedros Adhanom, and others, whom the Ethiopian government lets them flee the country, who are just workers or agents of the UN agencies who were just working in the humanitarian activities before a year. You remember the leaked video or audio that some of the UN agency workers do not agree on what they said. There was just a meeting, and on that meeting, they revealed the truth, the reality on the ground, but they were fired by the UN. So there are just actors, individual actors, lobbyists in the UN, and also people, for example, for me, Dr. Tedros Adhanom was, I know he is a TPLF member. He is currently acting as a political activist, aggressively working for the TPLF than just leading that global organization. Even during the highest moments of the global pandemic, corona pandemic, he was just doing a different task. So that is shameful. And there are just such actors, what I'm saying. And now let's move on to, if you have something to add here, you can.
Yeah, right. Most of the points you raised are very much fascinating, and it has been there on the ground for long. I know. I'm not denying that there are not actors. There are plenty of actors. Sure. But we should not be surprised. In a very protracted conflict such as this one, there are plenty of actors in and out. Where they have at national level, even, do you believe that there are people who want to exploit the political economy of a conflict? There are. Sure. There might be individuals, there might be businessmen in Ethiopia. They want to just benefit from the war in terms of arms smuggling, it might be, or in different border trading, or maybe border exchanging of just some kind of commodities to TPLF, to Mekelle. There are people who are benefiting from this. So when a conflict becomes protracted, there are new emerging causes. There are new emerging actors that can really exploit the political economy of the conflict. The other thing that people begin to theatricalize it. Conflict becomes a culture. It becomes a new normal. When you are just engaged in such a conflict for a long time, people consciously or unconsciously become in love with it. They begin to romanticize the conflict. Say, for example, sometimes if you follow the press statement released by TPLF in and out, day and night, every time they are releasing, they are running out of fuel, so they need fuel, they said. But ultimately, they use the fuel for just transporting weaponry. Sure. They cry for humanitarian aid whenever the World Food Program is transporting, with the help of Ethiopian government, with the goodwill of Ethiopian government. Sure. When they are transporting such aids, we can see on the trenches the food aids are there, just helping, or just for the fighters, for their fighters there. So ultimately, we forget that this is a kind of game. Once if you are in that game, in the war, it is a must to be abide by the rule of the game. While TPLF is getting weaponry or military assistance from Egypt and Sudan, it is very much puzzling and surprising to cry out loud that the Eritrean government is working together with the Ethiopian government. It's surprising. Once if you are just in that game, you have to abide by the rule of the game. There is no, we should not be double standard. TPLF is making atrocities, war crimes in Wollo and Afar. Even to date, in Kobo, they are devastating the populace. They are devastating the people. They are killing innocent civilians.
Yeah, sure.
At the same time, when there is an offensive from the Ethiopian side, they are crying for the international community as if it is really done onto them only. But they are doing the same thing if they have got chance. So there is no moral ground for TPLF to accuse any one of the parties in this conflict, whether the Ethiopian government or the Eritrean side. First, you have to free yourself to be just at the higher standard of the morals, at a higher moral standard. This is the play of the game. So most of in and out actors are there. Even with the State Department, there are envoys, ex-ambassadors, yes, that who are closely watching the issue of the Horn of Africa and particularly Ethiopia. And there are people who are in close allies with TPLF ex-leaders. So these people just might help TPLF in selling the agenda of TPLF for different lobbying firms. The Ethiopian government can do that. I think there are really encouraging tasks or moves that have been started by the Ethiopian federal government in this way. Diplomatic is a kind of market. So it is not about the facts on the ground, what matters. Rather, the way how you frame your narrative, how you design the discourse, how you set agenda, and how you just build a robust public relation strategy and to sell your agendas at international level in any way you like. This doesn't look only the central government, it doesn't look only the professional diplomats, it looks every citizen who wants to fight for the true cause of Ethiopia, to sustain the nation at least. If you are in this one, we can curve at least. Now things are making some kind of improvement on the Ethiopian side. It doesn't mean that these superpowers doesn't know what is going on there. But there is one thing they don't want to ignore, that is humanitarian crisis. People are dying. Children and women are suffering. There are war crimes, humanitarian crises there are atrocities everywhere. So how we expect the international community to shut up? It is the responsibility of the people of Ethiopia and the government to make this war brief as soon as possible in any way you like.
Sure.
Recently, one good move is that the Ethiopian government has gone miles for a peaceful negotiation. TPLF just makes some kind of precondition in that regard, really, because of the internal dynamics of TPLF within the party itself and within the Tigray itself. There are political movements. There are fatigue that is noticed from the elite group, from the political group, from the people. So they need this war as a kind of way out when there are some kind of dynamics, very, very powerful dynamic within the TPLF. TPLF use war as a tactic of making to rechannel such kind of forces in some way. So still, TPLF wants the war, they entered into the war, which is unplanned. I feel sorry, I feel pity for the people of Tigray and Ethiopia who are dying in front of the civilians, the children, the child soldiers there. It is very saddening as Ethiopian. We feel it. The government feel it that. But it is TPLF. They need political gain for at any cost, whether they just, there are much graphic atrocities done onto their people, they doesn't care. We can understand it from the very nature of this communist mentality. They are almost really, naturally, almost they are dying out people. But still, they just give promise for the Tigray people. Ultimately, what they would bring to the people of Tigray is questionable. There are different ways that they can serve the interest of the Tigray people in some way, without just devastating or costing such much lives. That is my belief.
Yeah. Well, so the next point we need to talk about is what measures should be taken by the Ethiopian government, by the Ethiopian diaspora, because they need to play a greater role in reflecting the reality on the ground, the reality about the TPLF, the nature of the TPLF, and also what the Ethiopian government has been doing to go to the ultimate peace talks with the TPLF. But before that, let's try to see the role of the global media. Certain global media, particularly those media, some media from the Western bloc, have been just portraying the Ethiopian cause as if it has been the Ethiopian government that has been just making errors, even making sufferings in the Tigray region, even making the National Defense Force making some atrocities there. So how do you see that? Particularly, let's relate that with the recent UN report on humanitarian crisis there.
Okay. One thing that is obviously clear is that there are different international medias that makes some allegations against the federal government of Ethiopia. This is the media. It is part of a kind of, you can consider it as a business. If someone pays, they can sell your agenda. But we can just make a counter narrative in that regard with equal magnitude. Ethiopian, why not Ethiopian medias? Ethiopian intellectuals can make a counter narrative. We can prepare a counter narrative media, just media narratives. We can change or we can balance the media discourse. But it is obviously clear it's part of the game. The 21st century, we cannot just. We need to just be up to that. It is a global age. It is a kind of digital age. So information is disseminating. We can't control every actor. Why? And we can't blame why they are doing so. They know their reason why they are doing so. One thing is not because it is a business. TPLF might pay a lot in order to sell just some kind of disinformation or misinformation about allegating the Ethiopian media as making some kind of hatred against its own people. They may say this one. But in this camp also, you and me and other media personalities and plenty of the people who are responsible citizens on the Ethiopian side can play also the same game to produce counter narratives. This is the reality on the ground. We need to accept this one. But I don't mean that there are medias that are accusing there are reports from the UN, there are reports from different international organizations that are making. So what is the source of data? Sometimes you question the methodology, how they gather data in order to produce such kind of reports. Exactly. You have to be careful here sometimes. But every actor, every organization have its own interest to serve. That interest, in order to just to be part of that, just manipulating that interest, just lobbyists might be there. TPLF peoples, loyal people to the interest of TPLF there, outside in different corners of the world, they are trying their best. But still, hopefully, our the public diplomacy crew, they are encouraging moves that were really making success stories in defending the GERD at international level, the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, and in defending the interests of Ethiopia, what is really the reality on the ground. There are peoples or the diaspora communities, they are trying their best. But what type of strategy we need to follow is very much important. To influence the US department, to influence the US lawmakers, it is not simply to just every time to shout out on the streets of Washington, D.C. Rather, intellectuals can produce articles. We need to just identify to whom we are presenting a certain kind of, Say, for example, for the scientific community, for lawmakers, for policymakers, it is better to rationally argue rather than simply to make emotional approach of doing things. So I prefer the Ethiopian diaspora, especially the intellectual diaspora, which resides in the US and Europe, can go miles to serve the interest of Ethiopia. I think there are encouraging activities already started by the Minister of Foreign Affairs and by different individuals who are bettering the diplomatic engagement with Ethiopia. Things will be better soon. But still, we need to have a good public relations strategy that we need to just communicate every time. When the Ethiopian government opens its door for peaceful negotiation, TPLFs might play a destructive role in that way. It may distract that. But at the same time, unless we accompany the effort of the incumbent, the Ethiopian government, with a kind of communication strategy or public relations strategy, how the global community will be aware of this? We need to, every time we need to give information to international medias, including the premier himself has to present it to the global media and have to just see the stand of the government, has to set the stand of the government, the initiative taken by the government. Our media should do the same thing on that. This is what just facilitating the PR and just disseminating information to any just actor that they're really just into the conflict.
Yeah,
we can do that.
I remember that during the onset of the conflict, after 3 days or 4 days, the global media have been just misrepresenting what the government was just doing, as if it is a sort of ethnic conflict, as if it was a sort of civil war and so on. And after that, the government was providing humanitarian aid to the people of Tigray in need. But what was reported by the global media was not the same. So as you said, the senior officials of the government, including the prime minister, if they just really appear at the global media and say the reality on the ground, that would be a really nice thing.
Here, whether we like it or not, we are in the digital age.
Sure.
There is a high degree of information flow on one side, which can be just positive. We can learn a lot from social medias, different from the mainstream media. At the same time, this global age poses danger for everyone. Part of, as a member of the global community, Ethiopia is one of it. So there are disinformations, information disorder in general. There are misinformation, all these things. So we need to develop a kind of mind setup to live by this 21st century's pragmatic reality. We cannot be out of this. So any media group can just make a disinformation alleging the Ethiopian government. Some might make misinformation, or there are plenty of hacks everywhere. So we should not be worried about this one. Rather, we need to produce our own counter narratives. Who wins ultimately is determined not highly by the type of facts or the strength of the facts. Rather, who wants to change or to control the shaping of the discourse, the setting of agenda, just framing the narratives there will ultimately be victorious. So we should not be that much hopeless in this way. Every time there are plenty of news released to the world about Ethiopian conflict, about the atrocities. Some are graphic informations, graphic numbers might be released. We should not be worried. We should not just prepare counter narratives to sell to the global community. It is in that way that we can balance the battle. Finally, we can just really just get successful or making bettering Ethiopia's diplomatic re-engagement with the West, especially the superpowers, US and European countries.
Okay. Finally, is there anything that you'd like to add, if I give you the chance, on the issue or the agenda we have discussed so far?
Yeah, really, what I would like to suggest, I assume myself also in that camp, if we have really a genuine cause to sustain the nation, Ethiopia is a great nation, it is a big country, which even any power all over the world doesn't want to or do not want to lose this region, to be destabilized, to be devastated, because the impact will be onto them also. If the region is completely destabilized, it will be a playground for terrorist organizations, for extremist organizations, for migration. So if they help the Ethiopian government to build a strong state, the benefit will be for all of us. It will have a regional benefit, a national benefit, and international benefit. They will know it. But sometimes we need to also, our intellectuals, especially our diplomats, career diplomats, have to be conscious enough how Ethiopia could navigate successfully as a country where the country that really resides or that is located in a very vital geostrategic position in the Horn of Africa. So how can we navigate just beyond the interest of or the competition of these great powers? On one hand, there are interests in the East camp. Russia is there, China is there. Here on the other, there is US and European interests. Without offending any of these parties, Ethiopia, I believe that Ethiopia could serve its national interest if we are strategically playing the diplomatic game. We can do that. So every responsible citizen, not only the career diplomats, the public diplomatic crew, and our intellectuals, has to defend the interest of Ethiopia in different medias, in different platforms, including social media. There are really betterments that are hopeful, that are noticed from the Ethiopian side.
Okay.
But still, the people of Tigray, I believe so, they are parts of the Ethiopian community. We feel for you. What is happening there is because of evil acts of TPLF. I think the Ethiopian government really would do it is best soon, and the siege will be ended in the near future, and the Tigray people will be free from the yoke of TPLF's long time governance.
Dr. Anteneh Getachew from Institute of Foreign Affairs, I really thank you so much for sharing your insights on the global actors in Ethiopian conflict. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dear viewers, this has been the conversation with Dr. Anteneh Getachew from Ethiopian Institute of Foreign Affairs. Thank you so much for watching us, and see you another time. I'm Sentayo Tamirat with this edition.